Welcome to the Daily Faceoff Show, your everyday source for the latest news with top-notch insight and analysis. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome into the May 5th edition of the Daily Faceoff Show. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Seravalli with you for 30 minutes of straight hockey talk as the Stanley Cup playoffs, Frank. The first round is always excellent. This year has been no different. Every night it feels like there's one or two games that are just insane.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed a little bit with Wednesday night's action in night 3 of the playoffs. A bunch of blowouts. We always hope for some drama and close games, and none of them were really close on night 3.
Yeah, but I got a lot of, and maybe it was more just chuckling at the antics, but Boston, Carolina was another spicy one. Edmonton responding the way they did was entertaining, at least from being in that building. So let's start there. So 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock, and let's dig into the Oilers stomping the LA Kings in game 2 of the series, 6-0 the final. And Frank, before I get your take on this, as you can see some numbers, I mean, Connor McDavid, 2 assists. He didn't get a goal. He had 4 hits. He was very physical, took a boarding penalty, but the ice time was something that I really noticed in this hockey game for the Edmonton Oilers. If you look, Connor McDavid, 16:52, Draisaitl barely over 15. Only 2 Oilers were over 20 minutes on the night, and it was Evan Bouchard and Duncan Keith. Bouchard picked up a lot of those minutes late in the game, getting some power play time as well. That's huge for me in a best of 7. If you can have a game that you win while also resting a bunch of your key players and not having to play them 25, 26 minutes, I think that could go a long way in this series. The question I have for you, Frank, after this win, would you consider Edmonton as being back in the driver's seat in this series?
Yeah, I would. I know they're just at level ground at 1-1 in the series, but the way that they responded in game 2, I thought was really significant. It was Leon Draisaitl flying. You mentioned McDavid being physical. Mike Smith getting his first win in the playoffs in 11 starts. Had game 1 sort of unfolded a little bit differently at the end, not with the Mike Smith gaffe, I feel like the feelings would have been a lot different. It wasn't just that they lost, but also the way that they ended up losing. For large stretches of that game, even though in game 1 they were chasing a bit, never had the lead, I really kind of felt somewhat comfortable with the Oilers and the way that they had played for the most part. And so you have a response like you do in game 2. I think the Oilers are clearly the better team. I think the Kings have been a little bit more strategic in terms of the way that they've played. I thought the Oilers did a better job managing the matchup game in game 2. And I think there's a lot of positives for the Oilers to look for and feel heading into game 3 in LA.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned they managed the matchups a little bit better, and part of it may have been taking away some minutes and maybe picking the spots better for McDavid and Draisaitl, but they also went with the 12-6 approach here. Josh Archibald in the lineup, and also the interesting point, and Archibald's a guy who brings a bit of that physicality to the Oilers' bottom 6. He helps out on their penalty kill. He can travel now. He's got a note from his cardiologist. Even though he's unvaccinated, he can cross the border, so that's a player Edmonton will be able to keep in their lineup as the series heads down to LA, and they'll look to get home ice advantage back tomorrow night at Crypto.com Arena. Another team who had a big response, Frank, would be the Minnesota Wild, and there was 3 first-period goals. They came out of the gates just flying, and Kirill Kaprizov eventually finished off the hat trick. What stood out to you in the Wild's 6-2 win over the Blues?
Well, Kaprizov getting the first Wild hat trick in franchise history in the playoffs was big, but it wasn't just the 3 goals. It was really his game as a whole, because that was one of the real alarming parts to me from game 1 was how good of a job St. Louis had done taking away Kaprizov's time and space. And in addition to that, he just looked like a player that was really frustrated through game 1. To see him come back out in game 2 the way that he did, I think is a huge boost for the Minnesota Wild. Marc-Andre Fleury as well. We talked a little bit in yesterday's show about the idea of the confidence factor with Marc-Andre Fleury, how maybe in the past, going back to the Matt Murray Pittsburgh Cup runs, going back to Pete DeBoer in Vegas with the sword in his back, that I think maybe there was this question of, does the coach trust me? Is he confident in me? And the fact that they went back to Marc-Andre Fleury in game 2 when they could have easily pivoted to Cam Talbot, I think is a huge feather in the cap of Fleury in terms of that confidence moving forward. and he rewards them with a pretty big effort in game two. He was outstanding, especially through the first 40 minutes in that game. And also, really, the way in which the Wild remained patient. The first 10 minutes of game two, the Blues really dominated play, and it looked like the Wild were on their heels a bit. They took advantage of a big mistake, an error, not even really Robert Bortuzzo's fault. He breaks his stick. It explodes on him, and they capitalized. The Wild did pretty quickly in putting the puck behind Ville Husso, and really after that, the game changed. So the Wild now get back to level ground. I think we all believe this is going to be a long series, and to see it play out with two really lopsided games to start, it kind of really makes you wonder what it's going to look like when the series gets to St. Louis.
Yeah, you mentioned, they get that one goal and momentum flipped, and they were able to kind of take over the game from there. One thing I looked at as well was their power play. They go 2 for 3 with the man advantage. In game one, they went 0 for 6. They had 3 power play opportunities in the first period of game one. And you looked at how they responded after finally getting a goal. And I kind of sit there and go, man, maybe if they would have gotten a power play goal early and gotten some momentum earlier in game one, maybe it would have been a little bit of a different story in the series opener. But regardless, the series is evened up at 1 as it heads over to St. Louis. One series that was not evened up last night was Carolina-Boston. And when you look at this Bruins team right now, there is just not a lot of good going on. And you got the smirk because you said it from the start, Frank. You didn't really believe that this Bruins team could keep up with the Hurricanes. And now when you we could throw it up here, the head-to-head matchups between these two teams, including the regular season, yeah, it looks like on every occasion, the Bruins are simply overmatched by the Hurricanes, right?
26-4. I mean, a lot of times we take the head-to-head matchup in a season and we throw it out. We say, you know what, that was the regular season, doesn't mean anything. Sometimes one team just has an opponent's number, and that's what it feels like in the case with Carolina. I think the two games, 1 and 2, were very different. I don't know that when you look at the game one score at 5-1, you say that was really a 5-1 game. I don't know if the score was quite indicative of how close the play was for a large stretch of it. But in game two, the Hurricanes just absolutely blew the doors off the Bruins. The Bruins looked frustrated. David Pastrnak really struggled. Bruce Cassidy saying this morning that they're going to Jeremy Swayman. No surprise for game 3 at TD Garden. And more than that, they're also now going to be down Hampus Lindholm, who was injured in game 2. So Linus Ullmark here exits the series with an .860 save percentage. And I actually kind of feel for him because I don't know that he really did all that much wrong. The Bruins sort of left him out to dry, with the Hurricanes able to capitalize on a number of different mistakes. And now the Hurricanes, in a series that a lot of people thought would be close, many thought that the Bruins could find a way to take this series against the Metropolitan Division champs. The Hurricanes just look to be rolling right along. And it's funny because we haven't mentioned at all Pyotr Kochetkov, the Hurricanes' third goalie, who ends up coming in spelling Antti Ranta, who was down again, as you see here. What a graphic here from our technical producer, Alex Allard. And Kochetkov now has 4 straight wins to start his NHL career. So I don't think it matters who's in net, and I say that with all due respect to Jeremy Swayman starting game 3.
Yeah, and I mean, you could argue it doesn't matter who's in net for the Canes as well, because it seems like they're just going to roll, whether it's their backup or their third string. When Ranta went down on that play from Pastrnak, I thought for a second that was going to be like a series-turning moment. Like, all right, maybe Boston in a weird, twisted way, like builds some momentum from this. As you see, Pastrnak was ultimately only given a 2-minute minor here. I thought maybe that was going to be a turning point, and it wasn't. And I always say that, or a lot of people say it, you're never really in trouble till you lose on home ice, right? But it's really hard to be confident in, for me, my Bruins to win the series bet that I placed a couple of days ago. Not feeling great about that one, Frank.
Yeah, it doesn't look good. And what exactly was the injury with Antti Ranta? Like, what did he hurt there? It was very odd.
It looked like he was bleeding a little bit around his mouth, but you're right. It was odd that he didn't even come back into the game. It didn't make a ton of sense. We've had some weird goalie moments, and we'll have more on that a little bit later in the show. Our fourth topic here to round out the opening segment, game twos tonight. New York coming off the triple OT loss. Florida coming off a stunning series opening loss to the Washington Capitals as well. Frank, who's facing more pressure to win tonight? And I'll say this, maybe it's vulgar. Who would be the most screwed if they lost game 2?
I think the Florida Panthers. I believe, history at that point, real doubt creeps in if the Panthers somehow lose game two. This is the President's Trophy winner that was an offensive juggernaut this season. And I think a lot of people had some questions, Tyler, about how this team that set the NHL record for goals scored in the salary cap era crushed it, in fact. How would their game translate to postseason play? Would they be able to be successful in tense and tight games and tight moments? 39-0 this season, Tyler. They were when they were leading after two periods. They blow that game one against the Washington Capitals, and I think the doubt has already crept in. But if they go down 2-0 and lose both games on home ice with that series shifting to Washington, I think that the Panthers could be in big, big trouble. Sam Bennett was saying after the game, this is going to be a long series. Like, who envisioned heading into this series?
Yeah.
Probably not even the Panthers, if they're being honest, that this would be a long series. So as much as I'd like to say the New York Rangers going up against Louis Domingue as the third goaltender for the Pittsburgh Penguins, I still think the pressure is squarely on Florida here to get back to level ground, do exactly what the 2014 President's Trophy winning Boston Bruins did, lose the first game, go on to win 4 straight, put it behind you, move forward, and continue your march.
See, and I'm going to disagree with you, actually. Just what we know about this Panthers team from the regular season is when they get hot, they are impossible to beat. And I look at them and go, if they were to go down 2-0, Washington's a team that's been inconsistent throughout the year. I could still see a way where the Panthers just go pedal to the floor and rattle off 4 straight wins somehow. For the Rangers tonight, if you do not beat a Penguins team that's starting Louis Domingue, and I get his numbers were good in the American League, he was good in that triple OT game, but if you can't beat a team that's starting Louis Domingue, what are you going to do later in the series when it's Tristan Jarry between the pipes?
Fair question, but just point to the 2019 Tampa Bay Lightning against the Columbus Blue Jackets in the first round. Not many people remember that the Blue Jackets were on the outside of the playoff picture looking in at some point in March that season, and the Lightning were one of the best regular season teams of all time with 128 points. They were swept. I think that recent history becomes a thing.
Speaking of the Tampa Bay Lightning, they evened up their series yesterday with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to dig into that a little bit more with the All 32 and our friend David Alter. Always a pleasure to welcome David Alter into the show, and the man is so busy he's doing this hit from his car. That's how committed he is. David from the Leafs Nation, All 32 delivered by DoorDash as well. Wayne Simmons talked after the game about, taking 2 penalties and it cost them 2 goals. There was talk about what the Leafs did wrong, but I kind of watched that game and went, I think Tampa Bay just did a lot right. And I view it as Tampa Bay winning that game and making a statement versus, maybe Toronto losing. What was your read on game 2 of this series?
It was somewhere in between. I do think Tampa eventually got their game going, but it took a while. Like throughout the entire first period, I thought the Leafs were the better team at 5-on-5. And if it wasn't for that late goal at the end of the period and a couple of other things that went against them, that I think Toronto kind of missed a real opportunity here to continue to catch Tampa sleeping a little bit with that slow start. But they did find their game in that second period, and their goaltending. That was really the hero for Tampa there. Even though they got the scoring and they did all of that, it was Andrei Vasilevsky who was really saving them in that opening period, and then that highlight reel save on Timothy Liljegren early in the second period as Toronto was trying to find an equalizer. All those things, I think, helped push Tampa to find what Tampa was, which was the world beaters, the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champs, and eventually get them going back into it. So I think Toronto really did lose a really good opportunity here to go 2-up in the series.
So, David, as the series shifts to Tampa, I think it's probably fair to say still, though, that the Leafs are in a really good spot. They won game 1 on home ice, and now Tampa goes to their home building. But, I think everyone on the Leafs roster and throughout their front office were expecting a big pushback from the Lightning in game 2. How would you assess the sort of psyche or state of the Leafs at the moment, knowing that was coming and yet not really still being able to handle it?
Yeah, I think they've got a pretty good handle on the fact that this was going to be tough and that this was going to be a not so easy series in terms of how many games it might go and the challenge that it presents. I think perhaps the most surprising thing for them right now, and what head coach Sheldon Keefe talked about today, was the fact that there's been so many penalties called early on in this series, and some of the issues there where a lot of their identity, which is a strong 5-on-5 game, is not really showing, especially in that game too. So some discipline issues, some things like that kind of got Toronto in a little bit of a funk they feel like they can correct. So they feel pretty good about it in that regard. How they adjust to the line matches going on the road is something that's going to be really interesting to see how Sheldon Keefe handles that, because at home he's been able to kind of shield some guys, but looking for a good solid fourth line and a bit of a different mix, that's going to be a challenge. But in terms of where they seem to have a pretty good feel for where their game is at, and that they're prepared for this series. But I think from an officiating standpoint, perhaps the fact that so many penalties are being called, and how they kind of have to adjust to their special teams is probably their biggest challenge at this point.
You talked about Andre Vasilevsky and just how sensational he was in game 2. I mean, that's a guy who, when the Lightning are coming off a loss, his goals against average is like below 1.5. It's insane. In the other crease, a guy like Jack Campbell coming in, there were a lot of people wondering what the Leafs were going to get between the pipes. Well, it was a shutout in game 1, then he allows 5 in game 2. Has Campbell shown in these first 2 games that there's no reason for Leafs fans to maybe be concerned about what they're going to get between the pipes, or did game 2 change anything about that?
I didn't see a lot of doubt or fault lay the blame on someone like Campbell for some of the goals he gave up. Perhaps, if you want to be a top 5, top 10 goalie in the league and want to be among the best, sometimes you really do have to make a huge save that turns the tide, similar to what Vasilevsky did early in that second period. And so maybe there is some criticism on that. But in terms of bad goals or anything that he could have done different,
Oh, I believe we may have lost David Alter here. Based on that screenshot, I think we have. So I guess that will be a wrap on the All 32. I had a question about Matthews and Marner and how they've combined for 10 points. And in previous playoff runs in the entire first round, they never combined for more than 10 points. So maybe I'll just throw that your way, Frank, to wrap up the segment. What have you seen from Marner and Matthews? And have they maybe, there was some doubt about specifically Marner, his ability to maybe come through in big moments in the playoffs, but 5 points in 2 games, the Leafs stars have not been the problem.
No, not at all. And I think that's such a positive, even just to get that monkey off your back if you're Mitch Marner for game 1. Breaking that 18-game goal drought was so big. It just allows you to just relax, exhale, feel some positivity and some confidence heading into the rest of the series. And it was nice to just be able to do it so early in the round so that the questions don't keep building. So fully expect Matthews and Marner to be at their sort of normal contribution level now. You've gotten the monkey off your back. Now just go out and play.
Yeah, 100%. The big thanks to David Alter for joining us for another edition of the All 32 delivered by DoorDash. You know the promo codes DFODD and DFODDUS. 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order when you use those two. This has been another edition of the All 32. All right, Frank, let's dig into our daily face-off inbox question. Hashtag AskDFO, the one series going on tonight that we haven't or one of the series we haven't touched on yet. The Colorado Avalanche and the Nashville Predators. Our friends at PointsBet Canada, the odds on the Avs to win this series is minus 3,000. That means you would have to wager $3,000 just to make a $100 profit on this series. The Avs put up 7 in game 1. The question is, how many goals for the Avs tonight? And will the Preds be able to keep it closer than it was in game 1?
I think the Avs could hit this over of 6.5 on their own, like pretty much like they did in game 1.
Yeah.
I like the response from Matt Duchene specifically from the Preds to finish off game 1, and it got a little bit chippy. I just don't think the Preds can compete with Connor Ingram or David Riddick in net against this Avalanche team that just is rolling right along. I think they're just going to put their head down, not take their foot off the pedal, and it's going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. You early in the year, you always warned me about betting against a team that got smoked their last game out. I remember there was a couple times like I was betting on or against Columbus after they got smoked and it burnt me. But I don't think the Preds are going to be able to bounce back in any sort of meaningful way tonight. It's 7 for the Avs. I could see him converting the touchdown again in game 2 of this series. Speaking of betting, let's dig into our daily bets segment courtesy of Points Bet Canada. And I got 3 plays lined up. So let's dig into them. And it's going to be another busy night in the NHL. I am starting with the Rangers and the Penguins. And I'm actually starting with my player prop today. It's Mika Zibanejad over half an assist. He had 2 last game. He hit this in 4 of 6 and 7 of 10 to close out the regular season as well. He's been a very consistent assist producer this season. I've bet on him a handful of times, and it usually seems to work out for me. The assist game has not been kind to me. I bet on Giroux a couple nights ago. He scored. I bet on Bergeron last night. He scored twice. So just doing that basic math, maybe you don't want to bet on Zibanejad to get an assist. Bet on him to score a hat trick tonight. But in all seriousness, I do like him to pick up an apple, and plus 115 is a solid payout. I'm also going out to the Colorado game, and it's hard to find value. They are minus 380 on the money line. Even the puck line isn't paying great at minus 140. But one bet that's close to even money is the Avs to win the first period. You can see it right there. The 3-way money line paying minus 110. They were up 5-0 after the first period in game 1. I think it is fully reasonable to think they could be up at least 1-0 or at least by 1 goal in this game. Again, 5 in game 1. I think the Avs will have the pedal to the floor, and they should be up after the first period. I like that payout. I'm going to wrap it up with a bounce back performance from the Florida Panthers, and I'm taking them actually on the puck line. If you go back through the last 2 months of the regular season, the Panthers only lost back-to-back games once. I don't think it's happening again. They've been good on home ice. This has been a good team throughout the year. I don't think they let game 2 slip against the Washington Capitals. Even money or close to it on the puck line isn't great, but I'm confident enough in the Panthers finding a way to bounce back in a meaningful way here in game 2 of the series. So it's a Mika Zibanejad assist, Colorado to win the first period, and Florida on the puck line are my 3 plays today, Frank.
Creative way to get around the Avs being such prohibitive favorites. So interested to see how that first period plays out. I don't think we've seen a first period bet from you all season long.
No, I really haven't touched them too much because usually the value's not there. Usually the first period is just a crapshoot, right? A lot of times it's just a grind fest and it's 0-0 or 1-1. But I really do think Colorado, being those big favorites, minus 110 is a solid price. Let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. Frank Seravalli, what do you got for me?
So it's actually an interesting wrinkle when it comes to playoffs. And I think, it's easy to think with how the world has changed a little bit that COVID testing isn't really impacting the NHL and the Stanley Cup playoffs. And it is, but NHL teams are finding a way to work around it. So take the Edmonton Oilers, for instance. They're not flying nonstop on their Air Canada plane charter flight from Edmonton to LA. They're actually flying to Vancouver and busing into Washington State and then taking another flight from Washington down to LA. And the reason for that is you don't need COVID testing if you are crossing the border by vehicle as opposed to by air. It's happened a lot for other teams during the regular season. The Toronto Maple Leafs are mimicking this as well. They're busing to Buffalo and then flying to Tampa. The Toronto Blue Jays have been doing this a lot. They've been busing to Buffalo. And then, for instance, even a really short flight to Cleveland to continue their series. That's the way around COVID testing. So the NHL doesn't require testing as it relates to COVID protocol. They did away with that when they amended the policy or protocol just a few months back. And since then, teams are like, well, on the off chance that one of our players is asymptomatic and has COVID, we'd rather just sort of not know. And so provided that the player is not exhibiting symptoms, it's not something that they have to worry about. So that's their way to get around testing. And in this case, it requires a few extra steps, potentially some headaches for some of these teams. But at the same time, Tyler, it might mean keeping a player or a bunch of players in the lineup, giving your team a better chance to win.
Anything to get a competitive advantage. My question is all the equipment flying too, or do these poor equipment managers have to load up a bus and then unload a bus in an hour just to get all the stuff back on the plane?
Yeah, my guess is the equipment is coming right with them as well. So they're unloading, loading. It's a lot of extra work for all the guys that are making everything happen behind the scenes.
Someone needs a bonus. That's all I know. Frank, there's one series. We have a minute here to wrap up the show. There's one series we didn't touch on today, and that's Calgary-Dallas. The war of words in the media with Klingberg and Anderson. Do we get Rasmus versus John round 2 tonight?
I don't think so. I think a lot of this was made in the last couple of days through the media. I'd be surprised if Klingberg actually wants to square off with Anderson. I know that Daryl Sutter's message was just play. So, unless something happens organically and there's a reason to do it, I don't know that these two guys are just going to square off just to do it.
The media making a bigger deal out of something than it is? That doesn't sound right, Frank. All right, that's going to be a wrap on the Daily Faceoff Show for May 5th. Enjoy another night of wild Stanley Cup playoff action. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com as well, and we'll be back with a fresh show tomorrow afternoon.
Thanks for watching the Daily Faceoff Show.
Make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel to never miss an episode.